All right, is everybody able to see my screen? PowerPoint, great.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, well, welcome. This is the Middle School Redesign Task Force.
Buenas tardes, este es el grupo de rediseño.
Thank you. And so we do have interpretation available, and so I'd ask our interpreter to go ahead and make an announcement.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Hay servicio de interpretación en español disponible. En la parte baja de su pantalla van a ver el símbolo del globo terráqueo. Le van a hacer clic allí y cuando salgan los lenguajes va a escoger el que dice Spanish o español y usted procederá a escuchar toda la conferencia en el idioma español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Just give them a little moment so they can transition to the other channel. Okay. Well, again, welcome everybody. I'm Dana Page. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, and I'm here to help conduct the next session in our middle school redesign process. We have done 3 sessions together. Most of the first 3 were very informational. You guys learned a lot, processed that information, asked lots of great questions. And we are now moving into the next 3 sessions, which are going to be focused on digging into scenarios and analyzing them based on the information that you've received, based on our guiding principles for what will be scenarios that are viable and solve the problem that we're here to solve. So as a reminder, we will be having a special board meeting that will be held later on as an opportunity. And that will be the point where the recommendation will be given to the Board of Education. The format for our meeting, as the first 3 have been, is still that it is public. We are live streaming right now. And we do have some visitors and some viewers tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. They are also recorded and these sessions are available online. If this is your first time tuning in to our sessions, I would highly encourage you to go back and listen to the first 3 and review the information that's available online on our website, our NBUSD website. There is a point in which we will be taking a pause from this main session, and our small groups will be moving into different links where they will be working and discussing things a little deeper in their own small groups. So at that point, there won't be any activity going on here, but we will come back from those groups and report out. And tonight will be really a progress check on where we are with our scenario analysis. Later on, we will have opportunities for public comment. In fact, I'd like to share, and I will reiterate again, we're going to have some town hall meetings set up for the public to give input. The next town hall is on Monday the 8th, will be in English, and then on Tuesday the 9th will be in Spanish. And we are encouraging our panelists here on the task force to make sure that they are present to be listening to all of the public comment that occurs during those town hall meetings. Right, so tonight's agenda, as I said, we are really going to be digging in and doing a lot of work together. So I'm going to just start off with an overview and kind of give you the big picture of what body of work needs to be done and how we're going to break that down. We're going to get a little more information that will be helpful in doing your scenario analysis around operational costs. We'll understand how those costs are derived. Then we're going to move into how you're going to be doing the actual analysis of scenarios. We'll practice with scenario A. Then we will send you off into your small groups to continue on with the analysis process. And as I said, we'll come back together, we'll conclude, we'll get kind of a gauge of how far people got in this process tonight. This is the overview of the work that's ahead of us. So this box down here is kind of our to-do list. We are going to need time to discuss and analyze at least 4 scenarios. We have brought tonight 4 to share, and there may be more that emerge, and we will address those as viable options depending on the time that we have to do so. The goal is really to choose a scenario for recommendation to the board, and then to have time to be able to prepare our recommendation and kind of package it and summarize it in a way that reflects all of the thinking and the work that's been done over the last 6 sessions. So you can see that we're not intending to do all of this tonight. So, just relax. We're not going to go speeding through this. We want to give everybody time to really dig in. So we have the next 3 sessions are so tonight, March 2nd, that's session 4. We have a session on March 16th that we will be meeting again as this group, and then on April 6th. So those are the next 3 sessions. You can see we have the town hall meetings that are scheduled in between this session and the next session. So this group, again, will have an opportunity to think some more about the scenarios, to digest what you hear from the town hall meetings, and bring that back into our March 16th session and continue to do the work in the small sessions. And ideally, we would be having a decision made as far as what is the recommendation that this group is going to put forward. And we would do that by April 6th in time for the special board meeting in April or May. So I would like to introduce Sarah Knox. I know you guys are familiar with her. She is the Director of Intervention and Prevention. She has been helping to structure our small group work, coming up with the processing activities and making sure that everybody has clear direction around that. And she's going to walk us through our norms for both this group and for our small groups.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see all of you again. So just as a friendly reminder, our procedural norms are that we start and end on time. We share the air when we are, particularly when we are working in our small groups. Tonight, please use the hand raise button to ask questions when we have points during the presentation of the scenarios to ask questions. And otherwise, please keep on mute unless you are speaking. Take breaks as you need them. We will have a little bit of a transition time in between the whole group presentation, then when we break out into small groups to take a short break if needed, because it is a long time. Next slide. And these are our general norms. Remember just to ask questions, be engaged, integrate new information and ideas, open your mind to diverse views, utilize the resources that we've made available throughout this process to help you make your decisions. Stay on task. Again, we have a specific task for tonight to evaluate the scenarios that will be presented against our guiding principles. And just a friendly reminder to attack the problem and focus on solutions, not people. Next slide. I'm going to toss it back to Dana.
Okay, so just as a reminder, to segue from Sarah's last point about, we need to be working on a problem and solving it together. And this, as a reminder, is our problem, that we have too many middle schools operating in the city of Napa, given our decline in enrollment, and that is creating a barrier to the best use of our resources. So these guiding principles should be familiar to you by now. We have been talking about them since session 1, and we will continue to frame our work around these 4 category areas of program excellence, fiscal solvency, responsible facility management, and equity. And as Sarah said, we're going to show you how the processing activity is going to work utilizing these guiding principles. But before we do that, you are going to see some data in the scenarios that will help you to kind of contextualize and talk about the scenarios, particularly against the category of financial management. It's important to know what kind of ongoing operational costs are associated with the various schools that we're discussing, so that if we were to close a particular school, what could we expect in terms of savings from ongoing operating costs? And Rob's going to talk to you about how we arrive at those estimations.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about calculating operational costs. Go ahead, next slide. So when you examine operational costs for a middle school, or any school for that matter, the first step is to understand what should be included and what should not be included. Costs that follow students, such as teachers and counselors, are never included in operational costs. What is included are costs of administrators, clerical support, cafeteria support, utilities costs, custodial, and maintenance. Next slide, please. Let me start by saying that the model that we use in terms of looking at the operational cost was developed by a certified public accountant based on industry norms. So this is not something that I locally came up with. It's actually the same model that we used when we considered not building a middle school and when we went through school closure at the elementary level earlier. And so when you look at operational costs, there are they go into two basic categories. There's the actual cost column, and then there's a calculated cost column. A lot of that has to do with the way things are accounted for at a school district level. And then also you do not necessarily get 100% of a given position. For example, a school site every school site doesn't get a carpenter or an electrician, but there's a cost associated with that cost, with that employee. So when you look at administrator salaries or clerical salaries, what you do is you're looking at the actual costs aggregated for the site. When you look at utilities, what we do is we look at our utility bills on a district-wide basis. We look at our custodial and maintenance costs and cafeteria on a district-wide basis. And then what we do is we basically take the utility costs for the entire district and we divide that by the number of square feet. And so on the utility side, that works out to be about $2 a square foot. And on the custodial and maintenance side, it works out to be about $10 a square foot. And so what we do is we then take that cost and we multiply it by the actual square footage of the site, which makes sense. If you think about your own home, if you have a 3,000 square foot home versus a 1,000 square foot home, the utilities costs for the bigger home are going to cost more money. And everything held constant, the cost of a bigger building will cost more than a smaller building. Obviously, age of a building comes into it also, and that's where Mike talks about some of the deferred maintenance costs. But for my calculation, on the calculated cost, I'm solely looking at utilities on a square foot basis, custodial and maintenance on a square foot basis, and cafeteria support on a square foot basis. Later on in the presentation, Dana will show you some of the actual numbers or ranges of numbers for the different plans that we're examining. And
Rob, can I add one thing?
Yes. Yes.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. This is Dr. Musetti. I just want to make it really, really clear that the operational cost, the calculation that Mr. Mangwala just described, are costs that we would save every year in perpetuity, assuming the consolidation and or closure plan. So just to be really, really clear, these are not one-time cost savings. These would be annual cost savings. So I just want to make that very explicit and clear.
Sure. If I could add on to that, Dr. Musetti, since you did point that out very well. The one thing that I would like to point out too, and I think I've heard this mentioned, I calculate the entire cost. Like for example, the cost of our Napa area large middle schools is about $2 million to run the school. In the first year, you're going to get at least half of that in savings. And then what over time is that will approach the $2 million. Part of the things that it takes a little bit of a delay of going from the 1 million to 2 million is disposal of the asset, right? In the second year, you're going to still, even though you're not running the school, utility costs are going to go pretty close to zero. Your custodial costs will disappear. There'll still be some light maintenance. But again, over time, you will definitely save that every single year on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
All right, so we are going to now walk you through how we are planning to attack the scenario analysis here. So we're going to do kind of teachers out there, we're going to do a I do, we do, you do kind of model here. So we're going to be giving directions and walking you through what it looks like. And we're going to demonstrate it, Sarah and I. And then we're going to do a little practice here as a whole group. And then eventually you guys are going to be off on your own, doing it with your facilitator who will review the process with you a little bit, but also be there to guide you through the process. So we're going to practice with scenario A. So this is roughly kind of what the visuals are going to look like when we present a scenario. Scenario A should be very familiar to you all. It's what we've been talking about essentially for the last 3 sessions. This is the status quo. This is our current reality without changing a thing. So for each scenario, we give it a name, and then we have a description of it. In this case, it's pretty simple. Keep everything the same. Current configurations of schools, current numbers of schools, nothing changes. So if that were to be the scenario that we were to go with, here's where you see that ongoing cost that we just alluded to. The estimated ongoing savings, obviously, of not doing anything is nothing. We would not save anything if we continued to operate like this. So what the job would be is to take that scenario and compare it against the guiding principles and do a rating of how that scenario, in this case, the status quo, lines up with the guiding principles. How well or not well does it meet those criteria? So we would be, and then you're going to capture it on a form. Now this is what you're going to see in your small groups. This is what the facilitators are going to be marking up. You can see that the scenarios run down the left side column. So starting with scenario A, we are going to be asking that as a group, you come up with a rating of how well scenario A meets that criteria within program excellence. And the rating scale is like a stoplight. Red would be it does not meet that criteria or any piece of that goal at all. It just doesn't meet the goal. Yellow would be, you know, somewhere in the middle. It partially meets the goal. It somewhat meets the goal. It's kind of that in between. And then green would be it meets the goal. We can give that our thumbs up. So we would be looking at program excellence, scenario A. Is it red? Does not meet the goal. Yellow, kind of sort of meets the goal, maybe some room for improvement, or green fully meets that goal. And then you move on to fiscal solvency, also for scenario A, same thing, red, yellow, or green. Responsible facility management, red, yellow, green, and equity. And then you can see there's a place for notes as you go. So we're gonna just break that down a little bit more. So we're gonna just zero in here on program excellence, one part at a time. And Sarah and I are gonna kind of model what we think this could look like if we were doing scenario A. So to what degree does scenario A, the status quo, meet the criteria within program excellence, which is a reminder talks about having strong programs that are vertically articulated, that improve things for the greatest number of students and provides access to students to all of the different types of programs that they need. So if Sarah and I were discussing this in our group, we might come up with some thoughts around, you know, we do currently have some really great programs, but we don't feel like maybe they're entirely all articulated vertically, and perhaps not all the students are having access to those really high quality programs. The access is not so great. So we might land somewhere not green because not everybody has it, but might come up with yellow. The yellow might capture that in-betweenness of having some really strong programs, but still some room for improvement there. And then you can see that we would capture our notes. Why does the group think that? Well, I mean, the group came up with these ideas around accessibility for students. So that would be the first part. Then we'll take a deep dive into the fiscal solvency of status quo. So to what degree does the status quo acknowledge and reflect the fact that we're in declining enrollment? Is this scenario able to exist on the current resources that we have and not be dependent on bond dollars and one-time donations and that kind of thing? Does the status quo, does this solution reflect what we need to be doing scale-wise to continue to operate in a fiscally solvent way? Sarah, I would say, you know, Sarah, what do you think?
I concur, Dana.
that this is not very fiscally solvent or sound, and we have been spending a lot of time looking at our enrollment data. We see the trends, and I think that we would land in a spot where we would say that doing what we're doing right now and not addressing the decline in enrollment is a recipe for a fiscal disaster, and we would give it a red. So then moving on to facility management. So this is specific to if we're being thoughtful about how we're using our facilities. Do all of our sites reflect our demographics and enrollment data? And does that play out in the way that we've arranged and allocated sites for people? Are we thinking about the cost of maintaining and improving our sites? And do we recognize how to use our facilities to really enable strong programs for our students? And also, to be, again, it is somewhat related to fiscal responsibility. Are we maintaining our facilities in such a way that allows us to use our money for other things like programs and compensation? So again, somewhat related to the ignoring the decline of enrollment, if we were to stay in status quo, keep the number of buildings we have, we've seen the data point around the number of empty seats that we have at the middle school level. That's pretty hard data to ignore. We again would probably have to say that that is not great responsible facility management and give that a red. Okay, so for the last category, equity. So we're going to open the floor here. So you guys have probably have caught on to how this works at this point, but we want to check here. So we would like to hear from the group. If we're evaluating the status quo, that is the scenario we're talking about, how is the status quo in terms of supporting all students having access to high quality educational experience, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, language, or class? Does our current scenario ensure that students in most need across all schools have access to high quality programs and services? And are we increasing diversity inclusion at all of our schools?
So this is the we do portion of the activity where we're going to ask people to chime in and raise your hands and use the raise your hand feature to let us know what you think about the scenario A, that status quo scenario, and how it lines up against the equity guiding principle.
Essentially red, yellow, green, why?
Can you have that slide up again with the rubric?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sarah, you can see the hands, correct?
Correct, I'll call on hands.
All right, I'm relying on you because I cannot see.
So the first hand up is Kathy Adams. Go ahead, Kathy, you can unmute.
Thank you. So for me, I would say yellow in that I think we do have good access and that students with need get most of what they need based on a district-wide look, but that increasing the diversity and inclusion at all schools is an area where we need work. So I would say yellow.
Thank you for volunteering.
Chuck, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, thanks. I would say between red and yellow, I agree with what was just mentioned there, but also the lack of accessibility to exploratory classes for a lot of our students, I think gives me some pause that pushes it towards the red from the yellow. So that would be my comment.
Okay. You get one more comment.
Courtney, go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. I agree with Chuck. I don't think that all of our students have access to the high quality programs that would be offered. I know it's been mentioned several times about how the 7th period day gave our EL students opportunities that they no longer have. And staying at status quo, I think, would be in a red for equity because where our resources are stretched thin in the status quo.
Great, thank you. Thank you all, everybody, for participating in that part. So if we're in our small group, we're gonna wanna make sure everybody has a chance to weigh in and express like what color you're thinking, why, have a little back and forth dialogue, really unpack where people are thinking. And, again, it's okay to have a difference of opinion here. This is where, we're here to lay out our rationale, share it with each other, and then, try to edge towards some degree of consensus around what color we come up with. And it may be that, you kind of pull the group towards the end and say, like, kind of what color are you at? If you were to throw all those bits of paint in a pail, what would that come out looking like, right? But the first step is really to listen to everybody's point of view, listen to the data pieces that they're bringing into the conversation, and hear that and really reflect on that, and then dig deeper into that conversation. So thank you. That was perfect modeling. Thank you to our 3 volunteers for speaking up. We're not going to do the color right now. We're just going to move on and talk about what the what you're going to have in your small group as a participant to kind of help you be able to do what we just said, which is to dig into those pieces of data and formulate your thoughts around these scenarios. So Sarah, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So you may have noticed that in your email from Dr. Musetti, you did not receive the participant guide yet, and that's because it's less of a note-taking guide this time and more of a reference sheet. So it's going to have the scenarios listed, and then it's going to have the guiding principles rubric that we just showed you and that Jen was smart to ask for to reference as you're thinking about what your rating might be for a particular scenario against a guiding principle. So you'll have the scenarios, like snapshots of the scenarios, then you'll have the guiding principles, and then you will also have all of the data in little snapshots that was shared from the previous 2 sessions. So you'll have that all on the same document to reference at a quick clip while you're having these discussions, so that you don't have to click back and forth between the session slides and your guide that you're looking at. We try to make it a one-stop shop for you for this particular small group activity.
Right, so that is essentially the process that we're going to do for each one of the scenarios. I just want to pause there and see if are there any questions about the process?
Dana, I want to add one thing that I forgot. Yeah. So you will be getting the small group participant guide through the chat in a link from your facilitator once you get into the small groups. So that's where the participant guide will be given to you tonight. And then for questions tonight, again, you can just raise your hand right now or anytime tonight.
So we haven't gone into all the scenarios yet. Just want to make sure that you're clear on what you're going to do when you get to your group for each scenario.
Laura, go ahead. You can unmute.
Thank you. So I do have a question, and it goes back just a tad bit to when Rob spoke about the different costs per square foot. And I was just wondering, Rob, could you I think it's pretty obvious what utilities, custodial and maintenance is, but maybe just give a brief description of cafeteria support and what that means from the district's point of view, fiscally supporting the cafeteria fund, how that plays into this.
Sure, absolutely. When you look at the dollar amount that I shared in the previous presentation, it's a very small amount. I mean, I don't want to call it a rounding error, but it's a smaller amount. So it was in the around $40,000 a site, if I recall right. So it's not a big dollar amount. Essentially, what it is it has to do with the fact that the district, running more cafeterias is more expensive. And the cafeteria program is not always self-sufficient. This year it happens to be because we're getting a lot of extra money due to COVID-19. We're being funded for every student. In a typical year, it takes a district contribution of about $1.2 million to the cafeteria fund. So if I were to provide guidance on that, the big picture is the size of the plant and the admin costs. Cafeteria costs is a smaller impact, but it is an impact. It's very small though.
Okay, so then my question would be, did you guys just take the total amount of the cafeteria support and divide it by the number of school sites, or was it broken down as detailed as the size of the schools and the generation of lunches sold at different school sites?
Well, you wouldn't, again, so for looking at that kind of detail for lunches sold at every school site, no, that type of accounting doesn't necessarily happen. It was, again, it's a small number. It's around $43,000, so it would be negligible in each decision. made. However, it was based on the size of the school or the enrollment. And so we came up with a factor per student, and then we multiplied that by enrollment is how it was calculated.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. I love those kind of questions.
Catherine Fleming, go ahead.
This was actually just going back a couple sessions, just a quick clarification on the numbers. Is NVUSD a basic aid school district?
No, we're not.
No.
So in the Napa County Supervisors presentation last week, not today, but last week, they are expecting NVUSD to go basic aid in 2023 and 2024.
I do not agree with that.
Okay.
That's wrong. I mean, I'll come out and say it. So just I don't want to get off topic, but
Yeah, no, I was just curious.
just for the audience, because you brought it up. And so what does basic aid mean? Basic aid means that you receive more money in tax revenues from property taxes than you should get through the state. And so what happens in smaller districts like Calistoga that have very high assessed value, some of the highest in the state, relatively small school district, they receive much more money per student. We receive, as a state funded district, about $10,000. To be basic aid, you could be basic aid meaning you get $10,001 and you're basic aid, right? You're getting $1 extra per student, or it could mean that you're getting $40,000 per student. So that switch between being a state funded district and a basic aid district, it doesn't mean that it's going to rain money on a district. Down the line it may, but what happens is you have two parallel paths going on at the same time, which is where you become basic aid. You have funding increases coming from the state based on an assumed cost of living adjustment. In our case, in the budget that looks like it's going to be adopted for next year, it's about 3.84%. So those revenues are going up at 3.84%. And then what you have from the basic aid side is you have price appreciation in real estate. In terms of talking to the county treasurer, appreciation, especially due to the fires in Napa County, is not, he's told us to expect 0%. So in terms of a budgeting model, I have challenges with us being basic aid in the next couple of years, because if revenues are going up from the state at about 3.3%, 3.84%, but if assessed value, again, that's not the same thing as when you look at Zillow. Remember, like you look at Zillow and you're like, my home value went up 10%, Rob, how can you say it's 0? Remember, it's based on that amount that you get because of Prop 13, which goes up by a fixed amount every year, right? So our county treasurer told us to assume it's going to be 0. Now, it could be some number bigger than that, but it would have to be dramatically bigger than that in order to offset the 3.84% that we're getting from the state. So I do not anticipate, and I've done some modeling on this, that we would be basic aid in the next couple of years. What it would take is it would take us having a 0 COLA year. So we did do some modeling last year where it looked like, and maybe that's what this article is based on. So when the state was talking about a 0% COLA and assessed values were very strong prior to the most recent fires, yes, that was in our near future. But now that there's a COLA on the table and the fires happened, I do not see us becoming a basic aid district in the next couple of years.
Thank you.
It may be somewhere in our future, and that's a possibility, but the district's not currently working on the assumption that it's happening in the next year or two. But
Yeah.
we do know that that was stated, and we're well aware of it. So thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, and probably the crux of the article is that negative ERAF money. That doesn't, even though that flows to us, eventually when we become basic aid, they're like, well, Rob, ERAF money is like 20 million. Does that mean that you're getting an extra 20 million? No, it's just the components in the bucket are switched. So if you think of the funding that we get, consider it, it's a bucket, it's a component of it that comes into play.
Thank you. Any questions again about process, or is everybody feeling pretty comfortable with that?
We have one more question from
Okay.
Rain, and then Laura, if you don't have another question, don't forget to lower your hand just so that I don't keep calling on you and bugging you.
I had a question in regards to the custodial and maintenance fees, is it what is being used by the school, or is what is the school site? Because if the school's not being used completely, are we taking into consideration the square footage of the entire school, or are we taking into the square footage that the students and the staff are using?
It's being calculated based on the square foot that is being maintained, including the old food services building, which is being maintained currently and cleaned, and there's a cleaning schedule for that.
And just because we're not looking at the scenarios yet, but when you do see these figures coming up, they're very broad, and most of the large middle schools in Napa, we're attributing roughly the same cost, because it is an estimate, and it'd be hard to really compare. They're really similar in terms of the 3 large schools.
Exactly. So I think what we're saying are the large middle schools cost about $2 million is about the cost. Does it vary a little bit? Yeah, it varies by $100,000 here and there, but overall, the large middle schools cost about $2 million to operate.
The exception to that average cost is River Middle School, and you'll see that in the cost savings articulated with the various scenarios.
Orlando, you have your hand raised. You can unmute.
Yes, thank you. I'm looking at the guiding principles, and the way it's laid out, it looks like there's 4 of them, and the way it's laid out looks like 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. Is that the way you are thinking about weighting these things, or is that still up for interpretation?
Yeah, I think at this point, we're just trying to gauge the temperature in those 4 different areas. And then the overall, we're not in this exercise, not asking you to necessarily rank them. So right now we're asking you to look at each one as an individual scenario against the guiding principle. So we're not thinking about weighting final options at this point. It's just a tool to kind of help unpack some thinking and capture people's sort of initial assessment of these scenarios in those categories.
Great, thank you.
I think that's a great question, Orlando. I do just want to reiterate for the group, all 4 are important. So all 4 of those guiding principles are important and need to be considered. They're all important. One cannot be left off because we have to, when we operate the district and make these sorts of decisions, we have to look at those 4 pillars in order to inform our decision making, to make sure we're making the best decision for the students.
There's no other hands raised, Dana.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna go ahead and move on. Reshare my screen. And we're gonna move into looking at the various scenarios. And we will stop for questions after each scenario, just to make sure people are understanding the description of each one. So we just did scenario A. I'm just gonna point out that the sort of the configuration of how we present each scenario is gonna be similar. You'll get a description. We'll say what we think the estimated ongoing savings would be. All right, so scenario B is a little complicated in the sense you see that there's kind of 4 different iterations of this particular scenario. But at its heart, what scenario B is to identify 1 middle school in the city of Napa to close. So it could be Harvest, that would be scenario B1 you may be considering. Could be B2, closing Redwood, B3, closing River, or B4, closing Silverado. So the consistency here is it's 1 middle school to close. And depending on the middle school, like we said, the Harvest, Redwood, and Silverado, the range of savings for ongoing expenses, we're putting around 2.2 million. For River, because it's a slightly smaller school, it has different operating cost levels. It's more about 1.2 million. Now, depending on the school that you're talking about, if you're talking about Harvest, then the additional consideration for that school would be the location of the dual immersion program would need to be relocated if Harvest was the school that was to close, because the dual immersion program can be untethered from a particular site, and it can be at another site. So again, so the way that you're going to do this one is you actually do have space on your sheet to talk about all 4. So you may, as a group, decide you're going to unpack all 4 of those options. You may decide as a group to start with one that you all feel like is one that's maybe more viable than the others, or maybe you just, want to just throw out one randomly and get going on that. It's going to be kind of up to your group how you're going to maybe assess all of them, assess one of them, assess 3 of them, 2 of them. At the end of the this whole part of the scenario assessment in general, what we should see is that you've taken a scenario B and identified which school you're talking about, because they are a little bit different when you break them down and you look at all of the data that we've provided over the last 3 sessions. They may come out differently on your scale. So you need to identify which one you're talking about, B1, B2, B3, or B4. And you may, like I said, you may do all of them, you may do most of them, you may do 1 or 2 of them. And then if scenario B ends up being the one that, your group sort of emerges and says, this is the one that fits the guiding principles the best, it should be very clear from your assessment, also which school you're identifying within that analysis. I hope I explained that right. Anybody's welcome to chime in and clarify anything that didn't come across clear here.
I think you did a great job, Dana, but I would like after every scenario, if we just open up the floor for clarifying questions.
Absolutely. So we'll pause here.
Any questions yet? If you do have a question, you can raise your hand or just unmute if you can't find the raise hand feature.
Okay, and we can always come back to when we're at the end of all the scenarios if something occurs to you later on. We want to make sure that you're understanding the scenarios really clearly. All right. So C is a little more complicated. In this scenario, we are identifying which schools would be closed in this scenario. And in this case, it would be closing 2 middle schools. We would close Harvest Middle School, and the students from Harvest Middle School, the boundaries would need to be drawn so that the homeschool kids of Harvest would now be assigned to Redwood and Silverado through boundaries. River would also be closed, and the students who attend River, because there is no boundary that sends kids to River, it's a school of choice, but the students reside within some other natural boundary, either already in Redwood, already in Silverado. Some of them are already in American Canyon Middle School area, or if they were in the Harvest area, then they would go to wherever those boundaries would be redrawn to split Harvest. So those students, again, close Harvest and River. Those middle school students would attend one of our other middle schools. Now, the second part of this is that we would then consolidate the students from NVLA dual immersion school, the whole school. So their students are K through 6th grade right now. We would consolidate those students in that dual immersion, combine them with the students of Puebla Vista, who are K5, to create one larger program of dual immersion. And the students who currently would attend Harvest in the middle years, we would also combine them into one program that was cohesively K through 8. But we would not locate them all on the same campus. We would locate the students of that broad dual immersion program. The K3 dual immersion students would be located at an elementary site that's appropriate for their age and for their needs, which would be to be determined. And then we would locate the students who are in grades 4 through 8 at the River site, where they where their needs as older upper grade and middle school students would be better met at that facility. So in this model, you would be saving the ongoing operating costs of one middle school and one elementary school. And that would be a combined savings of somewhere between 2.9 and 3.2 is our estimation of ongoing savings for this scenario.
So we'll pause there and see if there are questions that people have about scenario C. Laura, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Could someone speak to the relationship between the 4 through 8 grades and the K through 3? In other words, how do they generally interact in the current model? Is there some kind of synergy or relationship between those grades where, say, 4 through 8 are volunteering in K through 3 school, K through 3 grade classrooms or something like that? Can someone speak to that?
I think that would be specific probably to the individual school sites right now, because right now you've got Pueblo Vista, you've got NVLA. There may be opportunities for upper grade students to volunteer or do buddying and different things with the primary grades. That does happen often in elementary school sites. Right now, though, there's not, the schools, the programs of dual immersion are more self-contained between NVLA and Pueblo Vista. In this particular model, you would have a combination of those two programs together. And then, yes, you'd locate K through 3 at one spot and 4 through 8. Now, if they're not located on the same campus, you wouldn't be having the same, like, necessarily ease of being able to go, into the classroom like you could if they were located K through 5 on one campus. I'm not sure exactly what people are doing now, and I think it may vary, from year to year.
Dana, could I add something? Laura, I appreciate the question. I think one thing to think about, it's sort of an evolution in response to your question. The K3 years, as you may recall, when we saw the programmatic presentation, K12 in immersion, the target language is really Spanish, right? So this idea that in K3, Spanish is the target language. 4 through 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, well, 6th grade at NVLA in their current model, but 4th and 5th, the language balance, English is starting to be brought in, right? And so we get to a 50-50. So I would say if there's a marker in terms of the program, the K3 primary is where we're really, really trying to build the target language of Spanish. And then 4 or 5 is where the evolution of that dual language component comes in with the focus on the English being later in the later years. And so I just want to bring kind of, in response to your question, just kind of bring that in as a marker around the logic of a primary campus. Just to lay some additional numbers onto this, just to give you a sense of numbers. K3, if you combine our two amazing immersion programs at NVLA and Pueblo Vista, one of them would then be identified in terms of identity as the primary language campus. K3 across those two campuses right now, we have approximately 550 students. So that would give you a sense that it would be a K3 language academy model with the name and identity of one of those schools, with 550 K3 primary language DLI students. And then when you combine 4, 5, the 4th and 5th at PV, along with the 4, 5, and 6 at NVLA, and the immersion students in 6, 7, and 8 that are currently in the Harvest strand, you're running at numbers between 630 to 650 students, which is about the capacity at the current River site. So that's just a way of laying some numbers. We have our 2 hallmark immersion programs at the elementary level, and of course, the strand that we have at Harvest as well. So one of them would serve as the primary language academy with the name of one of the schools, and then the 4-8 would then serve as the intermediate middle school language, wall-to-wall language academy. That 4-8 environment would be a wall-to-wall language academy experience for the DLI students, and that gives you the number again, in the mid 600s, approaching mid 600s. Any other clarifying questions?
Go ahead, Stephanie, you can unmute.
Currently, are all students at NVLA and Pueblo Vista dual immersion students?
Yes.
Yes.
So you currently have wall-to-wall immersion at our 2 flagships here, NVLA and Pueblo Vista. It's very typical, the model that was adopted in the district at the middle school years, it's very typical to have a strand within a middle school That's very typical. I've worked middle year immersion programs in other places. What we are advocating for in this model, or that what this scenario kind of articulates, not necessarily advocating, but rather what the scenario articulates, is that we would create a 4 to 8 wall-to-wall immersion experience to bring strength to those middle school years, because we know there's a challenge when it's a strand within a school. This would now become a wall-to-wall experience in those middle school years, which is something we currently don't have because we run the strand model at Harvest.
Orlando, go ahead and you can unmute.
Thank you. So if one of the, let's just say that we locate one of the schools to say at Pueblo Vista, what would happen to NVLA, for example? Would that just turn into a non-dual immersion school?
No, remember, one of the physical campuses would need to close or you don't get the cost savings, right? So if we just create that if that becomes another school, then you don't get what's on the slide, which is the operational cost savings of not operating another elementary school. So you're getting the cost in this model of Harvest closing, right? That's the one middle school. And then when you do the consolidation of all the immersion students, K-8 across these 2 campuses, you're essentially transferring, you have the cost of running River as River Middle School today. You're essentially you're not saving that money because you're transferring the 4-8 students, right, to on that campus. So you're operating the current River campus, but now what's housed there is the 4-8 Language Academy. So what you're really saving is that elementary school through the consolidation of the DLI students. Does that make sense, Orlando?
Not really. So it just seems that there's one school, either Pueblo Vista or NVLA will not both be operating at the same time anymore. Only one of them.
That's correct. Yeah, that is correct in this model.
That's what I'm asking. What happens to the one that is not operating? It just.
So essentially, the way you can envision is that currently we have the kids would all be at one Language Academy K-3. And so I'll just I'll sort of label it just for clarity. You could have Pueblo Vista Primary Language Academy K-3 and Napa Valley Language, the Intermediate Academy 4-8, right? But you are eliminating the cost of running one of those elementary schools.
Thank you.
And the site itself would eventually become surplus property if it's not used for some other district purpose, but we would envision it would probably be surplus.
All right. Oh, go ahead.
Were there more questions?
Yes, there are. I thought someone was still talking. Laura, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, thank you. Okay, so Rosanna, this would be targeted to you. Going back to what you were just explaining to Orlando, and it's a TBD right now on the K through 3 location. Is it fair to say, is it going to be either NVLA or either Pueblo Vista, or could it likely be an entirely different elementary school campus? And the reason I ask that question is I'm also taking into account neighborhoods and community and what area of town is going to be the draw basically for that initial language dual immersion experience for families. Am I getting that right? Is it going to be NVLA or Pueblo Vista that's going to house the K through 3?
It's a great question. And the response to that is really to be determined. First of all, I just want something clarifying. So I do want to say that we have a significant proportion of our DLI students are open enrolled, right? So I just want to kind of make that clear, that it's very, very clear that a significant proportion of DLI parents open enroll and drive to the program, right? So I just want to make that note. Your question kind of invites, I think, getting that out there. That's important to know in terms of a data fact as you consider this scenario. The reason we're saying to be determined, it would have to be a site when I gave some numbers, right? So currently K3 across the 2 campuses, you're looking at 550 students. So it has to be a site that holds at least 550. we know Pueblo Vista it doesn't have that capacity. NBLA has that capacity. However, the reason we're not calling out a site right now is because you saw our enrollment reality. It is possible that the district is going to consider some more elementary closure. And so we want to leave that open. This isn't until 22, 23. And if there is a facility in good shape, based on some more facilities decisions that the district may need to make in the next 3 to 6 months, we want to remain open to that possibility. So we're not calling out the school right now because we think it's important as part of our sensible facilities management, that we really look at the entire elementary landscape, because there are possibilities with the numbers that we're facing today that there might be some more elementary closure in our near future.
Okay, thank you.
We want to consider all facilities and provide the best facility possible for the program.
Thank you.
So we remain open.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Dr. Mercetti. All right, Chuck, you can go ahead and unmute.
Thanks. In terms of this scenario, you've chosen Harvest as the school of the 3 large middle schools in town to close. And my question is, I assume that's probably partially programmatic in terms of the dual immersion, but also I would assume that a lot of that is financial as well, based on the numbers we saw. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Dina. Go ahead, Dina, please.
I think it has to do, like you said, with the identification of when you're removing then the dual immersion students, that significantly drops the enrollment for the school overall, and coupled with the state of the campus and the, in comparison to the other 3. Rasan, do you want to add something?
No, I think that's it. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Dana. Sylvia, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, good evening. So I had one clarifying question just because the slide is a little bit confusing. We are talking about the closure of Harvest and the former River Middle School section, or what would be considered the campus, correct? Or is that the new?
So no,
Right,
so we're talking about Harvest and the River new campus. So the school, the actual Harvest facility and students, the students would be relocated, and the facility at Harvest would be, would be surplused and would not be occupied. The River program and the students would need to be moved, and the campus would be then utilized for the dual immersion K-8.
Okay. And then my second question was, in this scenario, was there any additional consideration given to like the difference in the social emotional development of kids when you're doing the consolidation of 4 to 8? Because I know in the past, that's always been a huge consideration when we're talking K through 8 campuses, or would a K through 8 option be available for a dual immersion program? And that might be a little more, I don't know, there might be another scenario.
Hang tight.
Okay.
There is another scenario.
Okay.
It's a great question. And yeah, there's a lot of discussion and debate around K-8, right, programmatically. So, there's advantages, just like with every program, you have to kind of do your pluses and, what are the strengths and what would be the potential areas of weakness. And then you have to work to sort of address those in your program design, right? So in this model, one of them, just to be really, really transparent, one of the main drivers here is to understand that, to get kind of the cost savings and capturing the savings of a middle school and an elementary school, the K3 550 is a great healthy size elementary school. That's a great size for elementary. And then 4-8, right, is the way, there's the nice cut with the program that I provided in terms of, the language development to Laura Cerruti's question. But then we're also kind of trying to manage numbers as well here, right? So the K3 is giving you 550, which is a good size elementary. And then the 4-8 is providing you that number, which fits the capacity of the current River campus.
All right, Laura, go ahead and unmute. You can talk.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up on your point that most of the DLI students open, enroll, and drive to the program. Do you have a sense of what proportion of those are from bilingual, multilingual, or Spanish-speaking households? Are most of those students coming from the neighborhoods, or are they also enrolling? In other words, is location a factor in terms of getting those students that you really need in those programs to make them truly dual language immersion?
The landscape is a little different from Puebla Vista to NVLA. And so we can come back with some of that data for session 5 if you'd like to see the open and the open enrollment and resident. We can bring that data back. But it is a little different for each school. I don't know, Rob, if you have some of that enrollment kind of landscape off the cuff, or if you'd want to come back with that data.
I don't know the enrollment number, but as a rule of thumb, our schools that are highly dependent on open enrollment, those families tend to drive further, right? So on average in the district, it's about 3.4 miles. So if you look at it in terms of like how far do they drive or something like that, families across the district, so just call it about 3.5 miles. If you look at River, it's a school like that, it's typically higher. It's not quite that high when you look at our DLI programs, but yes, it does vary. So
I think the big picture, I'm sorry to interrupt, the big picture of Laura's question is, if you move around the immersion sites, is it going to impact the ability to create, which is the strength of immersion, a 50-50 landscape of our Latino Spanish speaking Latinx student population, and then our Anglo or English dominant majority, English only, 50%, right? And so the gift of the immersion program is that naturally creates a microcosm of what our broader community looks like, and actually our district demographic looks like. And I think Laura is asking the question, if we move it, do we run the risk of losing maybe the Spanish speaking Latinx community that might be attending the program because of location of site? Is that right, Laura?
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
Yeah, so we could take a look at that if that's an important data point, because you're not going to finish scenario analysis today. Our point is we want you to dig deep and go into scenario 5. So that's a data point that we could bring back in data 5 for in session 5 for the group.
Thank you. I'd really appreciate understanding more about that.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, Laura Miller, you can unmute.
Hi, one more question about dual immersion. So is the K-3, 4-8 model that we're looking at or considering, would we be trailblazing that, or are there other school districts or programs in the state or in the country that have this similar model of dividing it kind of in the middle? And it's essentially, to me, creating like a customized middle school experience when you have 4-8 at the same campus. So that's my question. Would we be trailblazing it, or is this modeled after something that's already had success?
We haven't done thorough research in terms of if there are other immersion models laid out this way. There are kind of lower K-3 and 4-6 or 4-8 models. Now, with immersion mapped on top of that, we haven't done our thorough research on that. And so could we be trailblazing it? Potentially. Do districts make these sort of programmatic decisions because of facilities capacity issues, because of enrollment, because they want to, strengthen middle school years, and all kinds of reasons that districts may come to what might seem like a more unique, customized layout in terms of grade levels? Absolutely. But I'm unsure of like it mapped onto immersion. I'm not very, we haven't done thorough research on that. What we are confident about is that we do know that there are K-8 immersion models, right? So that we do know there's K-8 immersion models, nationally and in the state. And we know that a lot of the time when K-8 is enacted for immersion, it's purposefully around the fact that they want to strengthen those middle school years so that students are going into the high school with a real depth in terms of their Spanish, because they've been able to continue to focus on it as they are in a wall-to-wall experience in the middle school years versus a strand. So we would say this is a K-8 model. It's just because of our facilities constraints happens to be across 2 campuses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. There's no further questions right now, Dana, if you wanted to move forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. Scenario D is a little bit kind of like what we've been talking about. So again, we would close Harvest, the campus, and consolidate the K-8 dual immersion students, again, from NBLA and from PV and the middle year students at Harvest who are in the dual immersion program. And this is kind of what, somewhat related to C. It would be a K-8 programmatically united, and it would be on the same campus. The proposal would be to house it at the former Harvest site. It would then create savings for 2 elementary school sites, NVLA and PV, to roughly about 1.7 million. Not as much as C because it doesn't incorporate a middle school operating cost, but because it's 2 elementary schools, a little bit less. But there is a note here, and you have to keep this in mind, and I'm sure those of you who've been on an elementary campus and seen, how kindergartners interact on a campus, Harvest is not equipped right now to have kindergarten young primary students on the campus. There's special needs in terms of playgrounds, in terms of bathrooms, and so there would be some significant upgrades that would need to be done to the facility to get it ready to house students as young as 5 years old. So we're estimating, this is an estimate, that the outlay of capital costs right away to get the campus ready for this kind of a model could be somewhere between $30 to $50 million.
All right. Are you ready for questions, Dana?
Yep.
Okay. So, Jen, go ahead.
So knowing those changes that are going to need to be made, would it be realistic to think that those changes could be made in time for this for 22, 23?
I'll clearly respond. The district does not have $30 to $50 million in capital, the capital improvement dollars that are laid out there in red. So this was a model that came to us back when we were looking at erecting the 7-Eleven committee back in October. I heard this circulated, parents mentioned it to me, it was circulated quite a bit back in the fall. But this scenario would require that $30 to $50 million, and we don't have it. So we currently don't have it. And we don't have a mechanism between now and 22, 23 to generate that $30 to $50 million. So some folks might start to go to well, what about property disposition? And what about those resources and getting it repurposed? To be really clear, disposing of property with school districts takes, it's a process. It takes from beginning to end, 2 to 3 years. And we can't even guarantee that it would generate enough money to, that there would be enough generation through our property disposition strategy with some of the properties that we're working on, because we're consolidating and closing, that we'd get to 30 to 50 million. So that is not a guarantee. So this is on this, you see what it would operationally save, but we have to put that note in red. We just don't have those dollars.
Thanks, Jen. And before I call on Laura and have you unmute, I did just want to remind our public audience, our attendees who are not part of the task force, that I see some of you raising your hands. And just as a reminder, we do have those town hall meetings that are going to be coming up for general audience members and community members to be able to ask questions and to share your thoughts about the process and the scenarios. So, but for the purposes of this task force, and because we have a lot of work to do, unfortunately, we just need to answer questions from the task force attendees or task force participants. So just wanted to clarify that. Go ahead, Laura, you can unmute.
I apologize. I think I have an unstable connection. So hopefully you'll be able to hear me. My question about this one has to do with, we saw some of the scenarios around what the middle school costs, what the cost would be to upgrade or do alterations to the middle schools. This is harder to evaluate because we don't know what we're talking about with regard to the elementary schools. So are there elementary school budgets that would then offset the 30 to 50 million? Perhaps that's not the case, but I was just wondering if there was sort of a sense of, if you close 2 elementary schools, does that mean that that funding for whatever upgrades, facilities upgrades they would need would then be able to be allocated to this kind of a scenario?
Potentially, but I think what's important, am I unmuted? I think what's important to remember is that just because we identify programmatic improvements that have to happen at all of our schools doesn't mean that we necessarily currently have the revenue stream to make that happen today. So do you understand what I'm saying? So I think that's just one important thing to understand, that even if we give you what the price tags are on all our schools in the district, that doesn't mean that we have the dollars to execute on all that, which means that we may not have the dollars, the capital improvement dollars, to transfer that to different school sites. So I just want to say that. Rob, did you want to add something?
I was just going to add to, and then Mike can cover me if I'm wrong here. But I would say that on the 2 elementary schools, in terms of capital improvements that we plan on doing, they're nowhere near $30 to $50 million. I mean, there's not that much planned work left on the bond. So if you say, okay, well, if we're going to close 2 elementary schools, how much were you going to spend in capital improvements on those sites? It's nowhere near $30 to $50 million. It's not. That's a very large number.
I think even if we had $30 to $50 million of work or funds that were planned to be spread out over all of the elementary schools, it would require diverting money that was planned to spend at many schools to one school in particular. And so even if it was available, you would have to filter probably every last dollar to this particular project.
All right, thanks for the question, Laura. Sarah, go ahead and unmute.
So that's a perfect segue. If you're looking at the capital improvements, would you have an individual bond measure or a bond initiative? How would you raise the revenue for this?
Well, bond measures are not guaranteed. So we'd have to try and, get a bond, but we would never run a bond measure for one single project. So that's, that would not be our strategy in terms of pursuing a future tax measure. Could some projects be articulated within a future bond program or pursuit of a tax measure? Absolutely. Although, running sort of these unique single interest becomes kind of a slippery slope for the district. I think you saw in Mike's presentation the massive improvements that need to happen across many school sites. And the past bond actually did really run on some focused kind of really big projects. And if the district were to pursue a future tax measure, we're going to really look at something that's holistically, taking care of a lot of the improvements that need to happen, particularly in the city of Napa schools. So
there is when we get to sitting down to evaluate each scenario using the guiding principles, there is a specific bullet point and there's the fiscal solvency around whether it's dependent on raising money through other means. So this would be there's a connection kind of there with this scenario.
Thanks, Sarah. Skip, go ahead and unmute and you can ask your question.
A couple of questions. First off, is the 30 to 50 million really needed to accommodate the elementary school students at Harvest? Secondly, is that all capital improvements or capital projects? And thirdly, is it possible in the follow-on meeting to get some detail in that 30 to 50 million?
Mike, can you just give kind of, we're calling that a rough estimate. It's pretty rough. But Mike, what are the kinds of things that have to be done to prepare a campus?
So Skip, thanks for that question. So, I mean, just conservatively, if we look at our modernization program plan study, that just would get our campuses warm, safe, and dry, and that's just modernization. So it's roofing, HVAC, exterior cladding, window improvement, things like that. What our consultant shared with us, and this would be, and again, this would not be triggering anything from DSA regarding ADA. or seismic, but it would be a little over $22 million at Harvest Middle School. And that would be, that's our current through 2024 needs that our consultants estimated. So that's just for warm, safe, and dry. We would need to, if we were to make Harvest a K-8, we would obviously need to modernize some classrooms so that we could have the standard of having restrooms in the classrooms for particularly kindergarten students. I believe there's at least 4 classes of kindergarten students between the two programs, potentially more. So you're looking at that modernization alone. We'd have to modernize some of the bathrooms too, to accommodate the smaller, the students that are, kindergarten, first and second graders. There are absolutely no playgrounds on that campus that have anywhere that meet the needs of the developmental needs of the students from K through 5th grade. So that would have to be something that would have to be addressed as well too. We do believe that if, based on where we would locate the classrooms, makes the most sense would be to put them where the former River School was currently occupying on the campus at Harvest. And it can be argued, and it can be argued not, but our argument would be to put the offices then back up in the front of the building, front of the campus, which is what the old Ridgeview campus used to occupy. And as I shared, that modernization was a significant amount of money to modernize that front office to make it so it's user-friendly for an elementary school. So, I mean, we could come back with obviously more detailed, estimates on this, but conservatively, it was 22 million just to make the campus warm, safe, and dry. And then to modernize rooms and things like that, you're going to be talking another, and the front office, at least conservatively, another 10 million and potentially more. And again, this is if you don't trigger anything with seismic or ADA, and you would be definitely triggering some ADA on that particular campus. I can guarantee you that would cause some more costs to go up. From that. So again, we can come back with more, but hopefully that provides with a little bit more insight of how we came up between, the $30 to $50 million range.
And the big picture is we don't have it. So the district does not have the 30 to 50 million to enact this in 22-23. So, I mean, that's just, it's a critical component for us to just be very transparent about. The other thing that I think may have gotten lost in all the discussion around scenario C, this would be a K-8. In this model, you are combining, again, just to be clear, Pueblo Vista, Napa Valley Language Academy, the students that attend 6 through 8 at Harvest, right, who attend DLI, the other students would go into either River, Silverado, or Redwood. And now we would be looking at a K-8 campus, which is not necessarily best practice in this scenario. I did mention K-8s as a program model that we see all over the country and the state. We'd be looking at a K-8 though that's almost 1,200 students. So just want to kind of layer that on there. It's K-8s of 1,200. You're talking from 5-year-olds to 8th graders. That's a large number. So I just want to make sure that detail doesn't get lost in the description of this scenario.
So to just sort of summarize the last 2 scenarios, you've got 2 in which we're creating K-8s programmatically. Scenario D kind of is, imagining that we could put everybody on one campus and create a K-8. And again, this is a scenario that has bubbled up, and we've heard it through many venues and wanted to include it here for your, to have your consideration and thought behind, how this would or would not work. And then C kind of takes the same idea, but then sort of layers it on top of our current facility reality of what we have available to us without having to do a lot of additional capital improvements. So maybe, so there's some compromise involved in C, but it accomplishes the similar goal of having a K-8 programmatic articulation. And I do want to remind the group that as other scenarios are revealed to us, either through this group, through your thinking, maybe through sort of mashing different scenarios after you're diving into these, if there's other ones that emerge, if we hear a ton at the town hall meeting, we'd like, we're going to put those forward too. If they are, if they're fair to consider, they need to come here and we will consider them and put them up against our guiding principles as well. So, Sarah, do we have any more questions, or are we ready to move into our small groups?
We have two more questions. Laura first, go ahead and unmute, and then Chuck after Laura.
Hi, this is directed to Mike Pearson. Hi, Mike. So my question is, on the Harvest campus where the former central kitchen used to be, that has now been moved and now has that large vacant space, what is it currently being used for since we moved the central kitchen? That's the first part of my question. And the second part is, if scenario D were to happen, which anyway, if scenario D were going to happen, have we thought about what that space would be used for, where the central kitchen once was?
So the current, so thank you, Laura, for that question. The current use of that particular area right now is for storage of supplies that we have throughout the district. We occasionally use it as an emergency. If we have a refrigerator or something, or a freezer go out, we fire up the refrigerators or freezers there so that we can save the food at other school sites if we need to. But it's predominantly being used from a storage standpoint. What I just spoke about did not include anything to do with that particular space and that particular space. So I had outlined, for example, at a previous meeting, that particular space used to be, that's where the housed the old cafeteria and the multipurpose room and the stage and things like that. And so that's what that space was used for. But what I just talked about did not incorporate any of those figures into that particular space. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Laura. Go ahead, Chuck.
Okay, thanks. So in scenario C and D, it would have the closure of Harvest, and then C with River as well. Do we have capacity at Redwood and Silverado to absorb all the rest of the middle school students?
Chuck, I'm probably the best one to answer that one, and the answer is yes, we do have enough capacity to, if we were to absorb every single student from the other programs, we could handle that at both schools. Initially, it would be the campus would be larger, but as we've seen with the projected enrollment, it would continue to decline again. And within 5 years, I think we'd be back under 1,000 students per campus.
Would there be any significant capital improvements necessary in that case?
Nothing, no significant capital improvements other than this, doing some of the work I just outlined with the modernization program plan study, from the standpoint of making sure, we upgrade our HVAC, which is something, and our roofing and things like that. But as far as any facility modifications or any major facility modifications from a capital improvement standpoint, I am not forecasting that to happen in either one of the campuses.
Chuck, that's a great question. I just want to kind of dovetail and affirm what Mike just said. Scenario A, B, and C are all scenarios that the district could implement in 22-23, right? So are there things that need to happen on our campuses? Absolutely. We demonstrated all of that. The distinction between A, B, and C versus D is D would require this sort of substantial campus retrofit because you're putting elementary on a middle school campus, whereas A, B, and C could all be enacted in 22-23 without, major capital dollars.
Thanks, Chuck. Okay, let's see here. Laura, did you have another question, or you just need to lower your hand? Okay, that's what I thought. Orlando, go ahead.
So you mentioned that the school district doesn't have $30 to $50 million for the scenario D. How much does the school district, how much do they have?
Would you like me to answer that question?
Well, yeah, I'll just say the current bond would not be able, the bond plan for Measure H is spoken for. So typically an improvement project of, this kind of size would require some sort of a tax measure. Our current bond does not have the ability to support this because it's spoken for. We have a Measure H plan and we're right now finishing strong on Measure H, not adding new projects of this scale. Go ahead, Rob.
I was just gonna say basically the same thing you said. All the money is spoken for. So what that would entail is, essentially breaking contracts with vendors who already have work underway, like for example, doing AC and roofs and things like that. So all of the money in Measure H is spoken for until the work is done.
And to build on that, we would have to have a new implementation plan that would have to then be adopted by the Board of Education. We just couldn't break these agreements that we had that we recently had them updated with, or they approved back in December of 2020, excuse me.
I guess I'm asking, how much money do you have allocated for any of these projects? Because it's, you know, it's very, it's clear that you don't have 30 to 50. So how much do you have?
If you, I want to double check, Orlando. Are you asking like for any of this modernization I've spoken to, or any of the facility modifications if we were to do Harvest as a K-8? Is that what you're speaking about?
Well, I'm speaking if, for example, one of these projects costs $15 million, could you say, yes, we do have $15 million to go after this project? So that's what I'm asking. Like, what is it that the district, so the district doesn't have any to really go to for any of these projects? I guess that's what I'm asking. How much does it have to allocate to any of these projects?
We currently, so everything I've spoken to you about around the modernization program plan, we currently have very little of the, what I want to qualify is we started some projects last year on doing some roofing and some HVAC prior to the modernization program plan study. We had an assessment done on some roofs. We realized we had some really poor roofs. We had some emergency repairs we needed to make. And so we started working on that. So we did allocate money in some instances towards this, but the big money that we're talking about, we do not have that current money.
Just to check understanding, Orlando, are you talking, when you say for any of these projects, are you talking about any of the scenarios, or are you talking about specific to scenario D?
What I'm talking about is how much money does the district have to enact any of these projects? Like it's very, you know, it's difficult to kind of say, to ascertain how much money we're playing with here. You know, so if something costs $30 million, does the district have $10 million? Does it have $5 million? What is the rest that you'd have to come up with in bonds, for example, to make something work?
To be clear, zero. Yeah. So I'll just be really clear, zero. So the district currently is implementing a Measure H plan. Measure H has already been spoken for, essentially, and the work that we're speaking of, there are some sort of small elements, like Mike just said, you know, the fields, for example, and I think the field was highlighted when we were looking at that's left to be done at Harvest, and fields got done with Measure H. Some roofs have gotten done to go under that dry with Measure H, but do we have $22 million right now to improve and do all the improvements at any one of these middle schools? No, we do not. The answer is no, and it's zero.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Skip. Did you have a question?
Yeah, just that I hate to flog a dead horse here again, but playing off what Orlando asked, for D, you have both a stated savings and a stated hard capital project cost of 30 to 50 million. And while I see the savings projected for C and to a lesser extent B, I don't see any associated hard costs in order to implement that program. And I didn't understand from the superintendent's last answer whether that question was answered or not. Does that make any sense?
Right, we've only included the cost with D because that's the only scenario where we see that those costs being necessary at that level. Now, you know, some of them may include some transportation, some minor things that in terms of operations that might ultimately come out of operational costs, but not in terms of massive upgrades to existing facilities.
I'll make it really clear. We can enact B and C, right? We can go ahead. I can move, right? Let's say we go back to B on the screen for me. Let's say we close B2 Redwood. We can move the kids from Redwood to the other schools without having to do a massive capital retrofit of, you know, improvement project of a campus in order to make that happen. We don't need $30 to $50 million if we close B2, if we close B4, whatever. We don't need that to, you know, retrofit these campuses to absorb more middle schoolers, because you saw the empty seats when we did session 2, right? Go to scenario. So we don't need a huge, you know, millions and millions of dollars to make B happen. Look at C. In C, we also don't need millions and millions of dollars because we're maximizing the facilities that we have, right? So we don't have to we have $0 that we'd have to put into River to make it a 4-8 immersion academy. Why? Because River's brand new. So the number there is 0. Locating the students at a K3, yeah, at 550, we will have an elementary site. That's not a problem. We will have an elementary site where we can have 550 K3 students. May that site need a roof? Sure. Lots of campuses in Napa need a roof. That's part of the reason we're having to do this work, because we have a resource issue and haven't been able to maintain our facilities very sensibly because we're stretched thin, right? But to make this happen, there's not millions and millions of dollars that we need to generate in order to enact B and or C. Go to D. If we want to enact scenario D, here's the bottom line. To take a middle school campus and retrofit it for 5-year-olds and, primary students and 4th and 5th graders, that is a significant campus retrofit. So, we're not saying that, the other middle schools don't have warm, safe, dry issues. That's all true. But we're talking about a complete refurbishing of a campus that is different than B and C in that way. So that's the distinction to sort of wrap your mind around. We don't need millions and millions of dollars to make B and C happen. We need millions and millions of dollars to make D happen in 22-23, and we don't have them.
Thank you, Dr. Musetti. Chuck, did you have another question?
I'm sorry, I do not. You may lower that and I will do it.
Carlisa, go ahead. Carlisa did not have a question either. All right, Eric.
Sorry, I do. Sorry, I forgot to unmute.
Okay.
Thank you. So what is the necessary savings we need to have as a district to remain fiscally solvent in our declining enrollment?
I can answer that. So it's going to be a moving target as long as the enrollment in Napa Valley continues to decline, and if COVID-19 causes a rapid acceleration, like everyone is predicting, it will necessitate additional facilities be closed. In terms of what's in our immediate future, in my second interim budget that goes to the board at the next board meeting in March here, there's an assumed closure of a middle school and a closure and a savings of at least $1 million. So that needs to happen immediately in our near future. So that would
not be clear. The reason second interim says $1 million, because just to remind you, as Rob shared, in the first year, you don't necessarily save the full $2 million, because until you liquidate the asset and you're no longer spending dollars on its maintenance, right? You may not be operating it in 22-23, but you still own it and you still have to maintain it and deal with it. So we're conservative in our estimations of the initial year savings until the property is ultimately disposed and we're no longer maintaining it.
All right, go ahead, Eric, you can unmute.
So just I guess a quick clarification, because after doing it in the 7-Eleven committee, just the way it jumped a little bit, the way that it was pitched to us, it feels like a couple meetings ago, was it was between 20 and 30 million for Redwood and Silverado for infrastructure improvements needed. And we saw Silverado where there was a lot of argument on whether they thought, facilities, whatever. So the new number that's being thrown out in scenario D for that is to make it retrofit for a K-8. Nothing to do with the fact that we still need some upgrades at Silverado and Redwood. Am I saying that correctly? Because that number changed, a number appeared to change from whatever, 67 million to 20 or 30 to 50. So for argument's sake, it's still a number that's somewhat unattainable the way it appears, but at least we can see why that number shifted. I just wanted to make sure that was clear in my head. So
yeah, and if you remember in session 3, I can't remember, I think it was session 3 when we were answering the questions around session 2, where we did the work around facilities and finance and enrollment, we said, for argument's sake, let's compare apples to apples or oranges to oranges. the range of facilities, facilities modernization that needs to happen at Harvest, at Silverado, and Redwood is in the range of $21 to $25 million. If we're talking about warm, safe, and dry. And when we answered the questions in session 3, we said for consideration moving forward, go ahead, compare apples to apples. It's 21 to 25 million is the price tag. Now, it's not to enact one of these scenarios. Do not get confused. It is not to enact one of the scenarios. We're just showing the task force and everyone else who's learning about this. This is what the current cost to keep these facilities in good shape for kids to be warm, safe, and dry would cost, so that you have that as a variable for consideration. But that's not a price tag on enacting the scenario. This scenario D has an additional price tag beyond just what we were talking about, Eric. So I think I'm paraphrasing or echoing back what you just stated.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks, Eric. Laura, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks. So going back to scenario C, this is kind of it's a loaded comment question and a little bit of hypothetical because we have a TBD on the K-3 potential location. So hypothetically, let's say we close Harvest and we close NVLA. We would now be closing 2 schools in the southwestern part of Napa, which is also one of the most affordable places that provides housing for much of our workforce. We're a public school system, and there are impacts to busing children from their neighborhoods to other schools. My question is, have we done research on the impact of busing kids with relation to the increase in truancy, because it's another extra step to have to get up earlier, get on a bus, be transported to school. And further, we'd be closing campuses that are dual immersion focused in neighborhoods that are very dually immersed with residents. So my concern is really, are we giving some thought to the impact of our enrollment numbers by not having schools nearby some of our most affordable housing areas in our city?
Well, I'll just throw out some numbers that I was able to conjure up. So there's a lot of questions there. So no, I mean, we haven't done any formal research on the impact of busing and its correlation with our students who are truant. We have not done that research. Like, you know, do we know that what's optimal for kids is for them to attend a neighborhood school? Sure, there's a lot of ideal characteristics of that sort of schooling experience for students, and we can all imagine why. But there's 259 students that live in the NBLA area in their actual attendance area, but only 147 attend. So that just gives you a number. You have over 100 students from that attendance area also open enrolling outside and attending other schools. So 147 students live in the NBLA attendance area. And then you saw, and so, I understand what you're saying, Laura, but I just kind of want to, it would be helpful probably to lay some numbers out, but there's a lot of kids who live in that neighborhood that has, where a lot of our workforce lives, as you described, who are also going outside of that area. They're not at all attending NVLA. And that's a big number. Over 100 students are leaving the area and attending somewhere else.
We also shared similar data around Harvest and the number of resident kids who attend Harvest, which is available in those slides that you'll have in your small group if you want to go back and revisit those. And I think the other question and data point was around the availability of students who would be able to feed into the dual immersion model in other areas of Napa. And because the demographics in a lot of our neighborhoods in Napa are, have large populations of native Spanish speakers in other neighborhoods as well. I think that's the other piece of data that would be helpful to take a look at. We were going to try to bring that back for next time.
So it's important, right? Because NVLA is a big school. Let's just focus on NVLA, for example. It's, a big school. Over 600 students attend there. Alejandra's on here, Principal Uriva's on here. She could probably give me her today number. What's your today number, Alejandra?
We have about 650 right now.
She's at 650. So she's at 650. You can't imagine that it's 650 students from that neighborhood who are now losing that campus in that community. It's just the majority of students are being from out of attendance area. And that's really clear when you look at the numbers that I've just shared with you.
I mean, not to argue with you at all, Rosanna, but I do think part of that is basically because it's a very specialized school and curriculum. So you're going to have students and families that aren't leaning toward the language immersion school, and it's not for them. But also another part of the beautiful part of that school is you've got half of the students in the neighborhood attending, and then the campus is also filled by out of area students, and you've got the English and Spanish mixture of students that's close to half and half. So, but just again, I was just thinking more along the lines of real estate with affordability in that part of town, and stripping two schools possibly would be somewhat devastating, really, with the desire of people to work and live here that may not necessarily be able to drive their kids to a school across town or even feel comfortable putting them on a bus. It's something that's been on my mind. I wanted to share. Thanks for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
All right, Lorraine, go ahead and unmute.
I wanted to know if the district has information in regards to the transportation costs to take students from Harvest or potentially from NBLA, and also the environmental impacts that it has on there. And the other portion of this, the question comes down to the majority of the kids that go to NBLA and Harvest, there's a huge number that do after school programs, and most of those kids do not have parents that are home in the afternoon, and they are at-risk kids. So by busing them to other locations, even if we go into scenario B, they're not having the ability to have the after-school programs and maybe at more at risk of doing things that you don't want kids doing after school. And then also in regards to, I think you said there were about 100 kids that live within the NBLA neighborhood that don't go to NBLA. And I know that there's a bus that comes at the very front of NBLA. Do we know how many of those kids actually take the bus and how many parents are driving them because they have the ability to drive them because they have two cars or they're off in the morning or in the afternoon?
So I think, the transportation costs, we will have to, maybe Mike can weigh in on that. We have a number of busing routes are happening all over Napa now, and there would be obviously some redirection of busing routes, potentially maybe adding some busing routes. And NVUSD is lucky to have their own transportation department and be able to manage our own transportation. So there would be some additional operating costs associated with transportation, nothing in the neighborhood of the kinds of costs for campus upgrades. And then I'm not sure if that it's fair to make the assumption that after school programs couldn't be moved to other campuses that are still open. I think that that would be something in the fleshing out of any scenario. We would want to make sure that we have those kinds of options, both transportation and after school kinds of programs available for students. But those things are portable programs and could also be moved.
So Lorraine, we could come back to you with some general figures. It's hard to give you anybody an exact dollar amount because ridership is not mandated. It's determined by who's going to be on there, who's riding it, and what the interest is. To provide you though, all of you with an example, currently Harvest is served by 3 buses. And so and this is just general education buses. This isn't any special education buses, which are not factored into this. Redwood is served by 1 general education bus, and then Silverado Middle School is served with 4 buses for students. So, and as far as, the actual, like I said, the actual cost, I mean, we can calculate it out. But again, it's really going to be determined on our ridership of people on it. And if we don't have sufficient interest of students wanting to ride a bus, we would then not run that bus if there was, a handful of kids wanting to ride the bus, and it just wouldn't cost out for us. So I don't mean to be ambiguous on this, but it's just really hard to give you a really firm dollar amount on the number of students of the cost that we may incur or we may not incur, because we would be shifting depending on which scenario we do, we can potentially would be shifting some of these bus routes to another location.
I understand that. And I also, Dana, I appreciate that we can move the after school programs, but by moving the after school programs, which normally run until about 6 o'clock, when many of the parents come home, we're not having buses run at 6 o'clock. It's not within the school district's busing schedule. They pick up the kids at 3 o'clock. So we're taking the kids from these areas, and we know that Old Sonoma Road, all those apartment complexes in Laurel and Underwood, and all those areas, those parents are leaving early in the morning. And so they're not there to get their kids on the bus, and they're also not there to be home when they get home. And so we're sending these kids home to an area that we're not going to have anything for them to do. We're taking away their field that they run in and all those things. So are we taking into consideration those aspects of the associated issues?
So Lorraine, yeah, there's impacts on all that. So that's why we have more than one scenario. So you're illuminating maybe what you may perceive as some of the shortcomings of scenario C. And that's okay, because they all have shortcomings. There's no perfection in this work. And so we encourage you to bring that up in your small group. And that might be in a reason that you know, in your group that don't see strengths in scenario C, and that's fine. And the district will listen to that. And it might be why you then go into scenario B and advocate for a particular other middle school to be closed. So we're here for discussion and debate. And so that's what the small groups are going to do. And so you can illuminate that in your small group, and you may, you know, this way may score red in certain areas for you because of it, which is fine.
I guess we do want to see if we can have some time in our small groups to at least dive into a scenario, maybe even two, just to kind of make sure that we're digging in and practicing that, the process, and making sure that we're applying that before it kind of leaves our brains. And then we will have time in the next session to continue on. We won't need to come back together and spend a lot of time revisiting scenarios or information. You'll have a lot of time next time. But I do want to see if at this point, if there are clarifying questions about process, or there's just not understanding a scenario and needing clarification on your understanding of a scenario, then now would be a good time to ask. If you want to raise issues of, you know, about the scenarios that you want everybody to consider, I think it is time then we're probably at the moment where we're ready to go to our small groups. That sounds like a sign that we're ready to dig in and start talking about them in smaller venues.
Jen, do you have a process question? Go ahead.
Oops.
There you go.
I was muted. Sorry. Usually we have our small group links in that document that we share, but since we didn't get it, where can we get the links to get to our small groups for processing?
I sent you an email on Friday, Jennifer, to the whole group, and in that body of the email are the links with your alongside the name of your group leader. It was a
Thank you.
Redesign task force message that went out Friday evening.
Dana, if you want to skip ahead to slide 34, I can. So this is the document that you will all get dropped into the chat of your small group, and it's only showing the first page of it, but it's showing you a snapshot of each scenario just as a refresher while you're having your conversations, and then it shows you the guiding principles rubric. Underneath those two tables are all of the snapshots of the data without all of those other filler slides from, you know, with explanations of process and things. It's just the data snapshots in the document for you. So that'll get dropped into the chat in a link that you can click on and open by your facilitator.
As well as all of the data slides from previous meetings will be in that same document, so you can go find relevant data that you'd like to take a second look at. And I just also want to invite facilitators in groups. If you don't have to be linear, you don't have to start, you know, at the beginning and work your way through. If there is a particular scenario that the group has, you know, a common interest in diving into, that is something that the facilitator can help ascertain from your group, and you can jump in there. We will have a decent amount of time tonight for you guys to start on this. We're going to ask that people come back very briefly at the end, just at 8:20, which just gives us really quick time to just zip around and get from our facilitator where you are in the process. How many scenarios were you able to get through? How many more do you have left to do? Just so we can have a time gauge of where we are in this process. And I think,
yeah, we're good to adjourn. I would just say if you skip ahead, Dana, to 36. Yep, to that one. Nope, the one before. Yep. So again, the purpose of this is not to say this is my favorite scenario. The purpose of the small group time is to use the rubric to make some evaluations of each scenario against each of the guiding principles, and then like Dana said, come to some sort of consensus, if you can, some form of consensus, and then do some explanations of your ratings, which will be recorded by a note taker in the small group.
And again, we may have other scenarios that emerge, and then we can take them through the same process later on. So pause and see if there's any, oh, here we are. Okay, so we will be here at 8:20, ready to hear back from facilitators. And with that, you know what, Sarah, we don't have our little slide about small groups.
I'm gonna drop it in right now.
Okay.
I realize that.
All right, so if our panelists can go ahead and find that email that Rosanna sent to you last week and find the link to your small group. Once you get in there, everything will be there for you. The facilitator will make sure you have your document to look at, and yeah, you'll be ready to go.
You can click to the next slide now, and it has our placeholder slide.
Oh, I think I might have to refresh.
Yeah, I think
share and do that.
So to our viewing audience, this is a good time to take a break while the small groups are deliberating and discussing the options or the scenarios against the rubric. We will be back just as a time check at 8:20 altogether, but this webinar will stay open in the interim.
Hello, this is John Burton. I'm just trying to find my breakout group. Is anybody out there?
Yes, John, do you have the email from?
Yeah,
Rosanna?
I thought I put it in my calendar as well, but I guess I did it incorrectly. Generally,
Sarah, do you have the link?
like I said, I thought I had put it in my calendar. I'll look. It came on Friday.
Excuse me.
We'll
Hi,
try
this
to
is Denise
email it
Heller.
to you.
Can you hear me? This is Denise
Yes,
Heller.
Denise. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, thanks.
I was trying to link from the email that was sent on Friday, and I'm just ending up in Zoom purgatory.
Oh boy, okay. So Denise and John, let me see if we can,
I'm in
John,
Steph
let's
Solberg's
see if we
group.
can- which group?
Stephanie Solberg.
Okay.
I'm sure it's my fault entirely.
It's never your fault. It's Zoom's fault.
John, we're gonna make sure you have the link in your email. It comes to the top so you can find it. And then Denise, I'm not sure how we're gonna fix your problem, but we're gonna try here. Just a minute. Let me get on to, Sarah, are you there? Are you, we should probably take a break. Okay.
I'm gonna go try again.
I'm gonna unshare just so I can go into my email here.
All right. Yeah, it's, the sitting and the waiting endlessly.
Denise, did you have a question?
I'm trying to figure out how to get, I tried to go into my breakout room and I ended up in Zoom purgatory.
And
So
John is missing his link. Sarah.
Okay, so
if somebody can maybe just, I don't have Steph's number, maybe text her or email her, get into her and just tell her to send me the invitation.
I think you have to leave, unless you have two devices, Denise, you have to leave this
Yeah, no, I did that. And
Oh.
then when I tried to go into that one, I got stuck in Zoom purgatory where I just sat and sat and sat. So I came back here to see if we could problem solve.
Denise, you're not wrong. I'm in your group and I can't get in either. The link isn't working. Yeah,
Okay, I'm glad it's not me.
I don't think it's us, Denise. That's why I came back in, Sarah. We can't get in group, and in Stephanie's group, we can't get in.
Let me check it. Sorry, I went to the restroom. That's why your hands ran away.
That's okay. I think Stephanie was trying to get a hold of you because it group B, the link, it just isn't working.
All right, let me find the email from Dr. Massetti.
It looks like it was set up on 126 and it just goes to nowhere.
Yeah.
So
okay, let me just double check it. Hang on. Okay, so you're in group B?
Yes.
Right.
Okay. I'm gonna have to do it on my phone because otherwise it's gonna kick me out of this meeting. So hang on. Please hold.
Hey, John, I found your link, but I've got to
find
your email in a separate.
Hey, Steph.
Okay.
I know. I went back to we're talking to, Sarah. Stephanie's in the webinar, but she can't talk to us because she's not a participant. So she's trying to get in.
So it just
she's in this group now?
I'm just in the waiting room of that meeting. So I clicked on the link from my phone and I'm in the waiting room.
I know. None of us can get in.
So she can't.
She can't get in either. No. She's I'm on the phone with Steph right now.
Okay.
You can't get into that link, Stephanie?
No.
No, she can't. I'm getting feedback because I have you.
Tell her to create, just tell her to create a new Zoom really quick, and then to send me the, and she should have your emails from your group to send you guys the link. Just tell her to create a new Zoom link.
Is she gonna have the community members as well?
She has all of the,
Oh, she's got us all.
for the whole group, yeah. Or she can send it to me and I can send it to you all.
All right, so I will go sit and wait for an email.
Sarah, this is Sarah Ball. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you in group B?
I'm in the same limbo. Yeah, I've been.
Yeah, we're gonna have her create a new link. I'm not sure why she can't get her own link, but that's weird.
Okay.
She just sent the invitation, so check your email. And if you didn't get it, let me know and I'll just shoot it over to you guys right now. Okay, she just sent it to me. So I'm gonna forward it to Sarah. Move my thing.
Hi, Sarah, it's Nancy. I would need the link too.
Yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna send it to the whole, no, it's confusing. I gotta find your emails. Don't worry, it'll just take me a sec. Okay.
This is what it's like for teachers sometimes.
Yeah, in virtual learning, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And we just roll with it. It's all fine.
That's what you do.
We do. Okay.
I assume you're talking about the small group B.
Yeah, hi Skip. We're getting it settled. So Sarah's gonna email us all a new link. So check your email.
I'll get out of here and wait for the email.
There you go. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, so I need Denise. Oh my gosh, I have way too many tabs open.
Hi, Stephanie.
What is going?
I'm sending the email to everyone right now. I just don't want them to have to say their emails out loud on public television. Can't find Skip. Where's Skip? Here he is.
Oh.
Okay, I just sent it to you. There's a new link. Sorry that took so long.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good problem solving.
Did I get everyone? Denise, I got you. I got Sarah. I got Jen. I got Skip. And Nancy. I need to send it to Nancy. I got you, Nancy. I'm sending it to you right now.
Oh, there it is. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Not sure what happened. Nancy, I just sent it to you.
Okay.
So people are just trickling back, and what we can go ahead and do is to, not sure if Dina is there, but
I'm here, Sarah.
can you go to the next slide? I think it has the share out.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So just quickly, we know that you were not probably able to accomplish much tonight, but we just wanted to do a check-in to see what each group was able to get done, where you're at in the process, so we can gauge time for next session. So Group A.
Also, Sarah, if there was any maybe questions that emerged about the process once you went back and tried to do it, maybe there's some things we could clarify.
Right, perfect. Thanks, Tina. So Group A, go ahead. They may not be back yet. Group B. Group C.
I'll go ahead. Group C, we began the discussion of scenario B, and we focused most of our attention on the first two guiding principles of program excellence and fiscal solvency. I do not believe we have any questions about process at this time, but if my group members would like to add to that, feel free.
Thanks, Monica. All right, going back to Group A. Anyone from Group A yet? All right, Group B.
Good evening. Unfortunately, we had a little late start with some technology issues. However, we were able to clarify process, and we were able to come to consensus on scenario D.
Stephanie. Group D.
We also were able to clarify process, and we discussed fiscal solvency in option B, yet we still have more to process.
Thanks, Carlisa. Group E.
Thanks, Sarah. We had a great conversation. We started with option scenario C, and we're able to talk about the first three categories, and we'll continue our conversation when we next meet.
Thanks, Matt. Group F.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So we talked about scenarios A and D as being ones that we sort of eliminated off of the top based on a number of different options. And so we focused our time primarily on option B, looking at the 4 different scenarios there and going through the 4 different areas. And we look forward to looking at option C when we get back in a couple weeks.
Thanks, Peter. Group G.
Yeah, so we were able to review process and do some foundation laying work. And then we took a look, we started with scenario D, and we're able to get through all 4 areas and are looking forward to working on C and B in our next session.
Great, Susan, thanks. Circling back to Group A.
Yes, we were able to also go through scenario D today, and we started scenario C, so we had started a really good conversation. So we'll just pick up next time on C and move back up.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. If there are no other process questions and questions about the small group activity that we were doing, then I'm gonna toss it back to Dina.
All right, thank you. So I appreciate that you just really only had an opportunity to kind of dip your toe into your small group discussions. And just as a reminder, when we come back for the next session, session 4 on March 16th, we can also then add, in addition to the data that you've seen over the last 3 sessions and the beginnings of your conversations with your small group, you'll be able to add what you hear at the town hall meetings, which one more time for you guys and for hopefully all the people who are tuning in right now, will be held next week. On Monday, March 8th will be the town hall in English, and Monday, March 9th will be the town hall in Spanish. And so many of you who were tuned in tonight and hoped for an opportunity to potentially ask questions or make comments about some of the scenarios, you will have that opportunity on March 8th and 9th. And again, we hope that you all here in the participant group will be able to tune in and hear those comments. And then we will reconvene on March 16th and maybe do a brief check-in as a whole group, but really just try to give you lots of time in your small group to continue to work through the scenarios. And as we mentioned, if there are new scenarios that emerge, then we can present those along the way as well. So I think that's it for us, kind of landing here right on time at 8:30. I want to thank you very much. I know that was a lot to process and maybe not so much time to work in your small group, but again, we'll give you more of that time next time. So take care and thank you. We will see you next week.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.